Good evening, dear listener, or good morning if you're tucked up with tea and toast. You are about to enter the gentle world of St. Mary Mead, where the roses bloom. The vicar frets over his sermon, and Miss Jane Marple, with her knitting needles and sharper wits, unpicks the knottiest of human puzzles. Pour yourself a cup of something comforting, settle back, and let us begin. Chapter 1. The Vanishing at the Fete. The village of St. Mary Mead lay bathed in the golden hush of a perfect July afternoon in 1952, the sort of day that seemed to have been ordered specially from a catalogue of English summers. The sky was a washed-out blue, the color of a child's paintbox left too near the fire. Wisps of cloud drifted like forgotten handkerchiefs. From the church tower, the clock struck the quarter, its chime drifting across the meadows and losing itself among the bee-heavy lavender hedges. At the heart of the village stood the vicarage, a rambling red brick house with a sagging roof and a garden that had been coaxed over decades into a state of disciplined wildness. Today, that garden had been transformed. White marquees billowed gently in the breeze, their canvas glowing like the sails of miniature galleons. Trestled tables draped in starched linen groaned beneath the weight of the village's collective pride. Scones as light as thistledown, strawberry jam the color of garnets, lemon curd sharp enough to make the vicar's eyes water, and a Victoria sponge so perfectly risen that Mrs. Bantry declared it positively architectural. Children darted between the legs of adults, their faces smeared with clotted cream and mischief. The brass band from Much Benham, 6 men in slightly too tight uniforms, wheezed valiantly through green sleeves, the trombonist occasionally losing the battle with a rogue wasp. Ladies in floral frocks and straw hats exchanged gossip in the shade of the cedar tree, while gentlemen in blazers discussed the price of marrows with the solemnity of diplomats negotiating a treaty. Miss Jane Marple sat beneath the cedar's sprawling branches, her knitting needles moving with the unhurried precision of a metronome. She wore dove-gray lace, a cameo brooch at her throat, and a straw hat pinned with a brooch shaped like a forget-me-not. Her hands, though knobbly with age, were steady. The lavender wool in her lap grew row by row, destined, though no one yet knew it, for a cardigan for the district nurse's expected grandchild. "Such a pretty thing," murmured Mrs. Bantry, fanning herself with the fate program. She was a handsome woman in her 60s with a voice like a trombone and a fondness for exclamation marks. "Arabella Clement's locket, I mean. Do look, Jane." Miss Marple's eyes, pale blue and deceptively mild, followed the direction of her friend's fan. At the far end of the lawn, beneath a small marquee of its own, stood the village museum's pride and joy. A single glass case upon a velvet-draped pedestal. Inside, on a cushion of midnight blue silk, lay the Clement locket. It was exquisite, rose gold, heart-shaped, no larger than a walnut, with a filigree clasp that caught the sunlight and scattered it like spilled sequins. A tiny keyhole suggested a mechanism within, and around the edge, almost too small to read without a magnifying glass, were engraved symbols. Neither letters nor numbers, but something in between. A placard beside the case read, in Mrs. Dane Calthrop's meticulous copperplate, "The Clement Locket. Bequest of Mrs. Arabella Clement, 1947. Please do not touch. Arabella wore it the night she decoded that U-boat signal," Mrs. Bantry continued, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hush. "Saved an entire convoy, they say. The Admiralty sent her a letter, framed in the museum. Though between you and me, Jane, I always thought she exaggerated. Arabella was dreadfully fond of a good story." Miss Marple's needles clicked. "One should never underestimate the power of a good story, Dolly, especially when it is true." Mrs. Bantry snorted. "True or not, it's worth a fortune. The clasp alone, rose gold, pre-war. And those symbols, Dr. Haydock says they're a map to a cipher device buried somewhere near Bletchley. Imagine, Miss Marple imagined. She had a vivid imagination tempered by 60-odd years of observing human nature in all its delightful and deplorable varieties. She had seen greed masquerading as generosity, love twisted into obsession, and more times than she cared to count, murder disguised as accident. But today, she told herself firmly, was a day for jam and sunshine. The band struck up Land of Hope and Glory, and the crowd stirred. It was nearly 3 o'clock, and the judging of the Victoria sponges was about to begin. Mrs. Evelyn Dane Calthrop, the vicar's wife, presided over the baking tent with the air of a general reviewing troops. She was a tall woman with iron-gray hair and a voice that could cut through fog. Today she wore a navy suit and a hat adorned with a single artificial cherry, which bobbed as she moved between the tables. "Order, please," she called, clapping her hands. "Judges to the front. Entrance, stand by your cakes." There were 7 sponges in all, each more magnificent than the last. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, had entered a lemon drizzle so delicate it seemed to float above its doily. Miss Hartnell, the chemist's sister, had produced a chocolate sponge layered with ganache and adorned with violets. The Misses Pettigrew, twin spinsters of uncertain age, had collaborated on a coffee walnut creation that smelled like heaven and looked like a small brown cathedral. Miss Marple watched from her chair, noting small details with the absent-minded air of one counting stitches. Mrs. Price's apron was dusted with flour, but her hands were clean. Too clean, perhaps, for someone who had been baking that morning. Dr. Julian Haydock, the young archaeologist cataloging the museum, stood at the edge of the tent, polishing his spectacles with unnecessary vigor. Colonel Proctor, retired and blustering, hovered near the tea urn, muttering about standards slipping since the war. At 3:17 precisely, Miss Marple noted the church clock. The judges reached Mrs. Price's lemon drizzle. Mrs. Dane Calthrop lifted the silver cake knife with ceremonial gravity. The blade flashed. The first slice parted like a dream. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Nestled in the heart of the sponge like a jewel in a pudding was a perfect replica of the Clement locket. It was smaller, of course. Marzipan painted with edible gold, the clasp a twist of sugar. But the resemblance was uncanny. Mrs. Price turned the color of her own strawberry jam. "A harmless joke," she cried, wringing her hands. "I had it made in marzipan. See the clasp? It opens." She demonstrated, and a tiny puff of icing sugar drifted out like snow. Laughter rippled through the tent. Someone clapped. The band, sensing a climax, launched into Rule Britannia. But Miss Marple's eyes had strayed to the museum marquee. The glass case stood open. Had it been open before? A small crowd had gathered, and Dr. Haydock was gesturing urgently to Inspector Craddock, who had arrived to present the prize for the best marrow. Craddock, tall and exasperated, pushed through the throng. "What's this, then?" "The locket," Haydock said, his voice cracking. It's gone." Silence fell as sudden as a dropped tray. The band faltered mid-note. In the place where the Clement locket had rested that morning lay a cheap brass imitation, its paint still tacky, its clasp a crude blob of solder. It smelled faintly of almond essence and warm sponge. Mrs. Dane Calthrop arrived at a run, her artificial cherry askew. "Impossible. I locked the case myself at noon." "Someone swapped it," Craddock said grimly. "During the judging." Miss Marple folded her knitting and stood. Her knees creaked, but her eyes were bright. "During the judging," she echoed softly, "when every eye was on the cake." She looked around the garden. The sun still shone. The band had recovered and was playing the Teddy Bear's Picnic, and children were licking jam from their fingers. But something had shifted, like a thread pulled too tight in a tapestry. A priceless relic had vanished, replaced by a baker's jest. And somewhere in this crowd of familiar faces, faces she had known for decades, lurked a thief with nimble fingers and a clever plan. Miss Marple smiled, a small cat-like smile. Human nature, she reflected, was a great deal more interesting than lavender wool. The church clock struck the half-hour. Tea was served, and the mystery of the vanishing locket had only just begun. Chapter 2. 4 Suspects and a Sponge. By 4 o'clock, the vicarage study had been transformed into a tribunal, the sort of room where generations of curates had been gently reprimanded for misplacing the hymnals. The Reverend Mr. Dane Calthrop had been banished to the church with a stack of parish magazines and a plea to pray for calm. His wife, Mrs. Evelyn Dane Calthrop, stood at the window like a sentinel, arms folded so tightly that the seams of her navy jacket threatened rebellion. Inspector Craddock had commandeered the vicar's desk, an oak monstrosity carved with gargoyles that looked as though they disapproved of the entire proceedings. A single gas lamp hissed on the blotter, throwing long shadows across the turkey rug. Outside, the fete continued in a muted key. The band had switched to waltzes, and the laughter sounded tinny, as though everyone knew something momentous had happened but preferred to pretend otherwise. Miss Marple sat in the least comfortable chair, an upright Windsor with a cushion that had lost its stuffing sometime during the Boer War. She had refused tea on the grounds that it would only be stewed, and instead occupied herself with a small notebook and a stub of pencil. Her knitting lay abandoned in her tapestry bag. Mysteries, she had long ago decided, required both hands free. Craddock cleared his throat. "Right. Let's have you in one at a time. No hysterics, no gossip, no—" He caught Mrs. Dane Calthrop's eye and moderated his tone. "No unnecessary elaboration." The door opened to admit the first suspect. 1. Mrs. Evelyn Dane Calthrop. She entered as though marching into battle, the artificial cherry on her hat now restored to its proper angle. "Inspector, this is absurd," she began without preamble. "I organized the entire fete. Program, marquees, insurance, even the brass band sandwiches. Do you imagine I'd jeopardize my own reputation for a piece of jewelry?" Craddock flipped open a notebook. "You had access to the museum case. You possessed the only key besides the duplicate in the safe, which I used at noon to adjust the velvet cushion. The locket was there then. Ask Dr. Haydock, he was cataloging." Miss Marple made a small note. "Cushion adjusted. Why?" Mrs. Dane Calthrop continued. "I locked the case again at 12:47 precisely. I remember because the church clock was 2 minutes slow, and I made a mental note to speak to Mr. Finch about the mechanism. After that, judging the sponges, you saw me, knife in hand, half the village watching." Craddock rubbed his temples. "And the marzipan replica? A tasteless prank. Mrs. Price's doing, no doubt." Miss Marple looked up. Yet the forgery was baked inside the winning sponge. Someone knew which cake would triumph. Mrs. Dane Calthrop's lips thinned. "I judged fairly. Though I will admit Letitia Price has won Best Sponge 3 years running. One does begin to suspect a certain predictability." She was dismissed with a curt nod and sailed out, cherry bobbing like a battle standard. 2. Colonel Lucius, Proctor. The colonel entered next, swagger stick tucked under one arm, mustache bristling with indignation. He had exchanged his blazer for a tweed jacket that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and gun oil. "Damn disgrace," he barked before Craddock could speak. "National treasure in the hands of amateurs. Ought to be in the Imperial War Museum under guard." "You were stationed near Bletchley in 44, Craddock said mildly. "SOE liaison, codename Badger. Top secret, can't say more." The colonel tapped his left knee, which gave a metallic click. "Shrapnel. Normandy. Still got the bullet in my dresser drawer." Miss Marple's pencil moved. "Bullet? Shrapnel is fragmented." You admired the locket yesterday, Craddock pressed. Admired. Coveted, more like. My sister wore the original, photos in the museum, died in the Blitz. Arabella promised it to me, then left it to the village out of spite. His voice cracked. He covered it with a cough. Sentimental value, you understand. Where were you at 317? Tea tent. Arguing with Mrs. Bantry about the price of marrows. Ask anyone. He departed with a salute that nearly took the lampshade off. 3 Miss Letitia Price. The postmistress entered clutching a paper bag that smelled of warm sugar. She was small and round, with a face like a currant bun and eyes that darted like startled goldfish. I never touched the real locket, she began breathlessly. Only the marzipan one. Look. She opened the bag to reveal 3 more sugar lockets, each slightly lopsided. Practice. I wanted it perfect, Craddock sighed. You baked the forgery inside your sponge. A surprise, like a sixpence in a Christmas pudding. I molded the marzipan last week, painted it with edible gold. Cost me 6 shillings at Harridge's. The clasp is almond paste. It opens to reveal a tiny note. Congratulations. Miss Marple leaned forward. You entered 2 sponges? Letitia flushed. 1 for judging, 1 for the children's tea. But Mrs. Dane Calthrop swapped the labels, said mine was over-ambitious. Mine won anyway. She beamed, then remembered the gravity of the situation and wilted. Your oven? Craddock asked. The post office range. I lit it at dawn. Lemon drizzle needs a slow bake. Miss Marple noted the faint scent of bitter almonds clinging to Letitia's cardigan. Essence, or something sharper. 4. Dr. Julian Haydock. The young archaeologist was last, mud on his corduroys and a streak of clay on his cheek. His spectacles were fogged. He polished them on his sleeve, leaving a smear. I was cataloging all morning, he said, voice earnest. Humidity readings, ultraviolet damage, standard procedure. The locket was intact at 11:58. I locked the case myself. Mrs. Dane Calthrop took the key at noon. Craddock raised an eyebrow. Family connection? Haydock hesitated. Arabella Clement was my great-aunt by marriage. The symbols on the locket match rubbings I took from a Roman villa site behind the church. Their coordinates, possibly to a wartime cipher wheel buried nearby. Miss Marple's pencil paused. Roman villa? Or convenient coincidence? You left the tent at 2:45, Craddock said. To fetch my trowel. The children were using it as a croquet mallet. He smiled weakly. I returned at 3:05. The case was still locked. The outsider, Mr. Rafferty Shaw. Finally, a stranger was ushered in, tall, urbane, with a camel hair coat despite the heat. He carried a silver-topped cane and smelled of expensive cologne. Rafferty Shaw, antiquities dealer, Bond Street. He introduced himself with a bow. I admired the locket at 2:45, offered Mrs. Dane Calthrop £500 on the spot. She refused. I was in the tea tent when the hue and cry began. Craddock's eyes narrowed. Alibi? Mrs. Bantry, the Mrs. Pettigrew, and young Tommy Finch, who sold me a raffle ticket for a bottle of elderflower cordial. He was dismissed with instructions not to leave the village. The door closed. Silence settled like dust. Craddock exhaled. 4 suspects with keys or access, 1 outsider with motive, and a cake that shouldn't have been edible. Miss Marple closed her notebook. 5 suspects, Inspector. You've forgotten the cake itself. Craddock stared. The cake? Indeed. Someone knew Mrs. Price would win, or insured it. Someone baked a forgery warm enough to smell of almond essence at 3:17. Someone swapped the lockets while every eye was on a knife. She rose, smoothing her skirt. And someone, I suspect, has flour on their conscience. Outside, the band played Jerusalem, and the scent of Victoria sponge lingered like a taunt. Chapter 3. The Postmistress's Alibi. The post office in St. Mary Mead occupied a narrow, bow-fronted building wedged between the butchers and the drapers like a polite cough in a conversation. Its bell gave a cheerful tinkle when Miss Marple pushed open the door at 6:30 that evening, though the sound felt oddly out of place after the day's commotion. The sun had slipped behind the elms and the high street lay in long lavender shadows. Only the post office window still glowed, lit by a single lamp and the lingering warmth of a busy oven. Inside, the air was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 letters, ink, sealing wax, and the faint metallic tang of stamps, and beneath it all, the sweet cloying perfume of almond essence. A brass scale stood on the counter beside a pyramid of brown paper parcels tied with string. Behind the grill, Miss Letitia Price was sorting the evening mail with the frantic energy of a squirrel burying nuts before winter. She started when the bell rang, dropping a bundle of circulars advertising Dr. Mackenzie's patent tonic. "Miss Marple, goodness, you gave me a turn. I thought everyone had gone home to nurse their nerves with cocoa." "I prefer tea," Miss Marple said mildly, removing her gloves one finger at a time. "Earl Grey, if you have it. And perhaps a slice of whatever smells so delicious." Letitia's round face flushed the color of strawberry jam. Oh dear. That would be the practice lockets. I couldn't bear to throw them away after... Well, sit down, do. I'll put the kettle on. The parlor behind the shop was a snug, cluttered sanctuary. A gate-legged table stood beneath a window overlooking the back garden, where runner beans climbed their poles like soldiers on parade. On the table sat a battered biscuit tin painted with roses. Letitia opened it to reveal the 3 remaining marzipan lockets, each nestled in a paper doily like a sugary Fabergé egg. They were imperfect. The gold paint had run in places and one clasp had snapped, but the resemblance to the Clement locket was still startling. Miss Marple took the chair nearest the range. The oven door stood ajar, exhaling gentle heat. Inside, a single sponge tin cooled on the rack, its contents already demolished by the constable on duty. Letitia bustled with cups and a brown Betty teapot, her apron still dusted with flour despite the hour. "I expect you've come about the locket," she said, setting out cups with violet sprigs. "I've told Inspector Craddock everything, twice, but he keeps looking at me as though I've hidden the crown jewels in the flour bin." "Inspector Craddock is thorough," Miss Marple observed, "though sometimes thoroughness mistakes persistence for suspicion." "Milk?" Letitia poured. Steam curled between them like incense. "I never touched the real locket, Miss Marple, not once. I only saw it properly yesterday when Dr. Haydock let me peek through the glass while he measured the chain. Such tiny links, rose gold, pre-war. My marzipan is only sugar and almond, but I wanted the proportions right. For the joke, you see." Miss Marple lifted one of the sugar lockets between thumb and forefinger. It was surprisingly heavy. The marzipan had been molded around a core of something denser, perhaps a pebble to give it weight. "You practiced 3 times. 4 if you count the one that melted when I left it too near the stove." Letitia gave a nervous laugh. "I'm not proud of it now. Mrs. Dane Calthrop said it was frivolous, but the children would have loved it. Like finding a 6pence. And the note inside?" Letitia produced a twist of paper no larger than a postage stamp. Unfolded, it read in violet ink, "Congratulations! You are today's lucky winner." The handwriting was unmistakably hers, round, careful, the T's crossed with a flourish. Miss Marple turned the paper to the light. "You entered 2 sponges?" Letitia's cup rattled in its saucer. "Yes, one for the adult class, lemon drizzle, my mother's recipe, and one for the children's tea. Plain Victoria, nothing fancy. But when I arrived this morning, Mrs. Dane Calthrop had swapped the labels. Said the children's sponge was over-ambitious and mine was perfect for judging. I didn't argue. Everyone knows she has the final say. Miss Marple sipped her tea. It was excellent. Strong, hot, with a bergamot scent that reminded her of childhood visits to Harrod's. So the marzipan locket was intended for the children's cake. Exactly. I baked it inside at dawn. Slow oven, 275 degrees, 2 hours. The pebble keeps it from rising too much. Then I glazed the sponge and popped it on the children's table at 1:30. Only when the judging began, my lemon drizzle was on the main table instead, and Letitia's voice cracked. Well, you saw what happened. Miss Marple set the sugar locket down. Who knew you would win? Letitia blinked. No one. Though, I have won Best Sponge 3 years running. Mrs. Dane Calthrop teases me about it, and Dr. Haydock asked yesterday if I was entering again. Said he'd put a shilling on me. She attempted a smile. It wobbled. Colonel Proctor grumbled that the war had ruined standards, but he always grumbles. Outside, the church clock struck 7. A blackbird began its evening song in the laburnum tree. Miss Marple leaned forward. Letitia, dear, may I see your oven? The postmistress hesitated, then led the way to the scullery. The range was an ancient eagle, its enamel cracked but scrupulously clean. Letitia opened the lower oven. The interior still held the ghost of warmth. On the rack sat a second sponge tin identical to the first, its contents untouched. I baked 2 lemon drizzles, Letitia explained. One for the fete, one for the post office counter. Customers expect a slice with their stamps on Saturday. But when Mrs. Dane Calthrop swapped the labels, I never thought. She trailed off, wringing her hands. Miss Marple peered inside. The tin was empty, but a faint ring of batter clung to the edges, lemon yellow, flecked with zest. She touched it gently. It was cool. You lit the oven at dawn? 5 o'clock. I'm an early riser. Mail to sort, papers to fold. The range takes an hour to heat properly. And the marzipan locket? Molded last week. I kept them in the biscuit tin, cool larder, away from mice. Letitia opened a cupboard to reveal shelves neatly labeled. Currants, sultanas, glacé cherries, marzipan. A small jar of almond essence stood beside a bottle of cochineal. Miss Marple lifted the essence and sniffed. The scent was sharp, almost medicinal. Bitter almonds, the smell that had lingered in the museum tent. She replaced the bottle carefully. You saw Dr. Haydock by the case yesterday? Letitia nodded. He was checking humidity. Said the glass fogged in the heat. He had a little thermometer on a stand. Very scientific. I offered him a scone, but he was too busy. And Colonel Proctor? Marched past at noon, muttering about security. Said the locket should be in a bank vault, not a village fete. Letitia's eyes widened. You don't think the Colonel? I think, Miss Marple said gently, that everyone in St. Mary Mead has a reason to covet beauty or history, or simply the thrill of possession. The question is who had the opportunity. She returned to the parlor and picked up her tapestry bag. From it she drew a small tin of peppermint lozenges and offered one to Letitia, who accepted with trembling fingers. One more thing, Miss Marple said. The pebble inside the marzipan, may I see it? Letitia fetched the biscuit tin and carefully broke open one of the remaining lockets. The sugar cracked like thin ice. Inside lay a smooth oval stone the color of weak tea. Miss Marple turned it over. Etched faintly on one side was a symbol, a tiny arrow crossed with a wavy line. It matched the rubbings Dr. Haydock had shown the museum committee. Letitia gasped. That's not my pebble. I used ordinary garden stones, washed, of course. This one's different. Miss Marple slipped the stone into her pocket. Indeed, and garden stones do not come from Roman villas. The kettle whistled again, forgotten. Outside, the blackbird's song gave way to the soft thud of the butcher closing his shutters. Letitia stared at the broken locket as though it had betrayed her. "I only wanted to make people smile," she whispered. Miss Marple patted her hand. "My dear, the best intentions are often the ones most easily twisted. Now lock up your oven and have a nice cup of cocoa. I shall see myself out." She stepped into the dusk. The high street was empty save for Colonel Proctor marching toward the Red Lion, his swagger stick tapping a military rhythm. He did not see Miss Marple. His gaze was fixed on the church tower where the hands stood at 7:10. Miss Marple watched him go, then opened her notebook. In neat, spidery handwriting, she wrote, "Letitia's alibi. Oven lit 5 a.m. Sponge baked 5:07 a.m. Marzipan molded previous week. Pebble substituted when. Haydock symbol. Mrs. D.C. swapped labels. Motive? Colonel's route past Museum 12 Stobars. Bitter almond scent. Essence or cyanide?" She closed the book and tucked it away. The peppermint lozenge tin clicked shut like a secret. Somewhere in the village, a thief was counting on the assumption that a postmistress's joke would distract from a sleight of hand. But Miss Marple had spent a lifetime observing distractions and the hands that created them. The church clock struck the quarter. Tea was over. The investigation had only begun. Chapter 4. The Colonel's War Wound. The morning after the fate broke with a soft, pearly light that made St. Mary Mead look as though it had been rinsed in milk. Dew sparkled on the cottage gardens. The milkman's horse clip-clopped along the lane with the unhurried dignity of one who knows the world will wait for its pint. Miss Marple, already dressed in dove-gray wool and a cameo brooch, stepped out of her gate at 8:20, a small wicker basket over her arm. She had an errand at the butcher's, lamb chops for luncheon. But her true destination lay beyond the war memorial, at the far end of the village where the cottages gave way to larger houses with gravel drives and yew hedges clipped into submission. The barracks, as Colonel Lucius Proctor had christened his residence, was a square red brick villa built in the 1890s by a retired tea planter with imperial ambitions. Its windows were narrow, its chimneys tall, and its front door painted a martial green. A brass knocker shaped like a lion's head glared at visitors. Miss Marple rapped twice, the sound echoing like a distant bugle. The maid who answered, Elsie, 16, freckled and perpetually flustered, bobbed a curtsy. "Colonel's in the garden, miss. Says he's inspecting the roses, though they're only just coming into bud. Tell him Miss Marple has brought him a jar of my greengage jam," said Miss Marple, producing a small pot from her basket, "and ask if he will take a cup of coffee with me." Elsie's eyes widened. Greengage jam was currency in St. Mary Mead, but she scurried off. Moments later, the Colonel appeared, blazer swapped for a cardigan the color of wet sand, swagger stick replaced by secateurs. His mustache bristled with suspicion. "Miss Marple, early for social calls." "I find the morning air sharpens the mind," she replied serenely. "And I wish to return your pruning knife. You left it in the tea tent yesterday." The Colonel accepted the knife, its blade still flecked with lemon zest, and grudgingly ushered her through the house. The hall smelled of beeswax and gun oil. A glass case displayed medals in velvet rows. They emerged onto a terrace overlooking a lawn so level it might have been mowed with a spirit level. Rose beds marched in formation. A sundial bore the inscription Tempus Fugit in letters worn smooth by rain. "Coffee's in the summer house," the Colonel grunted. Cooks laid out biscuits. "Don't touch the shortbread. Rationing's over, but habits die hard." The summer house was a cedar pavilion with lattice walls and a view of the church spire. A tray waited, silver pot, Crown Derby cups, a plate of shortbread arranged like ammunition. Miss Marple poured while the Colonel paced, secateurs clicking. Damn business about the locket, he began without preamble. National disgrace. Should have been in the War Museum years ago. Arabella knew that, promised it to me, then left it to the village out of spite. Miss Marple handed him a cup. Spite is a powerful motive, Colonel, though one wonders why she waited until her will. The Colonel snorted. Arabella was a law unto herself. SOE 43, codename Nightingale. Decoded a U-boat signal, saved a convoy, got a letter from the Admiralty, framed in the museum. But she was vain, wanted the glory to live on in St. Mary Mead. He tapped his knee, it gave a metallic click. Shrapnel, Normandy, still got the bullet in my dresser drawer. Miss Marple's cup paused halfway to her lips. Bullet, not shrapnel. She filed the discrepancy away. You were with SOE? Liaison. Badger, they called me. Can't say more, official secrets. He bit into a shortbread with unnecessary violence. Crumbs showered his cardigan. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to a photograph on the summer house wall. A younger colonel arm in arm with a woman in WAF uniform. The woman wore the Clement locket. Its rose gold gleamed against her throat. The resemblance to the colonel was striking. Same hawk nose, same defiant tilt of chin. Your sister, Miss Marple said softly. Clara. Died in the Blitz 44. Bomb took half of Stepney. Arabella promised me the locket. Clara's last link to the family, then she changed her will. His voice roughened. He covered it with a cough. Sentimental value, you understand. Miss Marple set her cup down. Yet you were in the tea tent at 3:17 arguing with Mrs. Bantry about marrows. Correct. She wanted first prize for a vegetable the size of a torpedo. I told her it was deformed. He gestured with the secateurs. Standards, Miss Marple. The war taught us standards. She opened her basket and produced the jar of green-gauge jam, its lid sealed with red wax. A peace offering. I believe you admire preserves. The colonel's eyes softened. Clara made green-gauge every summer. Haven't tasted it since. He cleared his throat. Thank you. Miss Marple rose. One more thing. The locket's clasp. Dr. Haydock says the symbols are coordinates. To a cipher wheel, perhaps? The colonel's face hardened. Rubbish. Haydock's a pup, wet behind the ears. The symbols are decorative. Arabella liked pretty things. He tapped the photograph. Clara wore it for luck, that's all. Miss Marple stepped onto the terrace. The sundial's shadow had crept forward. It was nearly 9. Luck is a curious thing, Colonel. Sometimes it hides in the unlikeliest places. She left him standing among the roses, secateurs dangling forgotten at his side. Her route home took her past the churchyard. The Roman villa excavation was in full swing. Dr. Haydock and his undergraduates had roped off a rectangle of lawn behind the vestry. Tarpaulins flapped. A wheelbarrow overflowed with clay. Haydock himself was on his knees, trowel in hand, spectacles fogged with effort. Miss Marple, he called, scrambling up. Come to see the tesserae. We've uncovered a dolphin mosaic. 2nd century, possibly a bathhouse. Another time, Doctor. She indicated the church. I'm returning the hymnals Mrs. Dane Calthrop borrowed for the fete. Haydock wiped his brow, leaving a streak of mud. Terrible about the locket. I measured it yesterday. Rose gold, 18-carat, clasp engraved with symbols matching my rubbings. If it's a map, the cipher wheel could be worth thousands to historians. Or to thieves, Miss Marple said mildly. Haydock flushed. I only catalogued it. Locked the case at 11:58. Mrs. Dane Calthrop took the key at noon. And the pebble in Mrs. Price's marzipan? He blinked. Pebble? Miss Marple produced the etched stone from her pocket. Found in her practice locket. The symbol matches your villa rubbings. Haydock took the stone, turning it to the light. Good Lord, this is from the Hippocaust layer. Fired clay, not garden stone. Someone substituted it. His eyes narrowed. When? That, said Miss Marple, is the question. She continued to the vestry. Inside, Mrs. Dane Calthrop was arranging lilies with martial precision. Her artificial cherry hat hung on a peg. Without it, she looked almost vulnerable. Miss Marple, I've been expecting you. She snipped a stem with unnecessary force. The safe combination. Only the committee knows it. And Mr. Shaw asked to sketch the locket yesterday. I refused. Miss Marple placed the hymnals on the desk. Yet someone swapped the locket while you judged cakes. Mrs. Dane Calthrop's scissors paused. I moved it to the safe at noon for insurance photos, returned at 2:30 to find the forgery. Her voice trembled. Flour on my cuff, same as the sponge. I must have brushed against the table. Miss Marple noted the cuff. Plain navy, no flour. Curious. She left the church and paused at the excavation. Haydock was photographing the dolphin mosaic. An undergraduate held a measuring tape. Miss Marple's eye caught a glint in the spoil heap, a brass button tarnished but unmistakable. She pocketed it. Back home, she opened her notebook. Colonel Bullet versus Shrapnel. Sister's photo, locket promised. Green gauge sentiment, route past museum, 12-hour, 12:47. Haydock, pebble from villa, mud on boots, left tent 2:45, 3:05. Mrs. D.C., safe combination, flowerless cuff, swapped labels, brass button, SOE issue. She closed the book. The church clock struck 10. Somewhere in the village, a thief was polishing a plan as carefully as Dr. Haydock polished his trowel. Miss Marple reached for her knitting. Lavender wool, steady stitches. The pattern was emerging. Chapter 5. The Archaeologists Dig. The Roman villa site lay behind St. Mary Mead's church like a half-remembered dream. A rectangle of churned earth and fluttering tape that had swallowed the old tennis court whole. By 9:30 on the second morning after the fete, the July sun was already fierce, turning the clay to the color of dried blood and the air above it into a shimmering haze. Dr. Julian Haydock moved among his undergraduates with the distracted energy of a conductor whose orchestra has lost the score. Trowels scraped, sieves rattled. A gramophone in the vestry window played Elgar at low volume, as though the Romans might appreciate a little pomp. Miss Marple arrived with a second wicker basket, this one containing a thermos of coffee, a packet of Garibaldi biscuits, and the brass button she had retrieved from the spoil heap the day before. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat tied beneath her chin with pale blue ribbon and carried a parasol the color of clotted cream. The undergraduates greeted her with shy delight. Archaeology, they had discovered, attracted elderly ladies the way jam attracts wasps. Miss Marple, Haydock called, scrambling out of a trench. His corduroys were caked to the knee and his spectacles were held together with sticking plaster. Come to lend a hand? We've uncovered a Hippocaust pillar, perfectly preserved. Another day, Doctor, she replied, shading her eyes. Today I bring sustenance, coffee strong and sweet, and a question. Haydock accepted a cup with gratitude. Steam curled between them like incense. Ask away, though I warn you my mind's on tesserae. Miss Marple produced the etched pebble from her pocket and laid it on his palm. This was inside Mrs. Price's marzipan locket. You identified the symbol yesterday. Haydock turned the stone to the light. The arrow and wave motif caught the sun and threw it back in a tiny, malevolent glint. Fired clay, 2nd century, from the Hippocaust layer. See the vitrification? Someone substituted it for Letitia's garden pebble. He looked up, puzzled. But when? She molded the marzipan last week. Exactly. Miss Marple sipped her coffee. Someone had access to both your dig and her biscuit tin. Haydock's ears reddened. I may have left a tray of finds in the vestry overnight. For cleaning. The door was locked, but Mrs. Dane Calthrop has a key. Miss Marple filed the information away. And the locket itself? Catalogued at 11:58 on Friday, humidity 62%, temperature 71 degrees Fahrenheit. I locked the case. Mrs. Dane Calthrop took the key at noon. He gestured toward the church. I was here all afternoon except between 2:45 and 3:05 when I fetched my trowel from the children's croquet game. Miss Marple's parasol twirled. You are Mrs. Clement's great-nephew by marriage. Haydock flushed. Distant. Her husband's sister's boy. I never met her. She died before I came down from Cambridge. But the locket's clasp matches rubbings I took last month. He led her to a trestle table beneath a tarpaulin. A folder lay open to parchment sheets inked with meticulous care. The locket's symbols enlarged, rotated, compared to fragments from the villa's drainage system. Coordinates, he said eagerly. If I'm right, the cipher wheel is buried beneath the bathhouse, worth a fortune to Bletchley Park Museum. Or to a thief, Miss Marple murmured. Haydock's enthusiasm dimmed. You think I swapped the locket to fund the dig? I think, she said, that ambition is a powerful motive, as is family loyalty. She moved among the trenches. The undergraduates worked in pairs. One scraped, one sifted. A girl with a sunburned nose unearthed a shard of Samian ware and held it up like a trophy. Miss Marple paused at the spoil heap, a mountain of clay and disappointment. Yesterday's brass button had come from here. Today she spotted something else, a twist of silver paper half buried beneath a clod. She teased it free with the tip of her parasol. It was a wrapper from a chocolate bar, Fry's 5 Boys, the kind sold at the village shop for 3p. The silver was torn. Inside, a crumb of chocolate clung like a dark tear. Miss Marple slipped it into her pocket. Haydock joined her. We break for luncheon at noon. You're welcome to stay. Another time. She indicated the wrapper. Your students bring sweets to the dig? He laughed. Constantly. The Pettigrew twins smuggled a whole box of licorice all sorts last week. Said it was field rations. Miss Marple's eyes strayed to the vestry window. The gramophone had moved on to pomp and circumstance. Mrs. Dane Calthrop's artificial cherry hat was visible inside, bobbing as she arranged hymnals. Tell me, Doctor, did you notice anyone near the museum tent after 2:45? Haydock scratched his head. Only Mr. Shaw, the antiquarian. He asked to sketch the locket at 2:30. Mrs. Dane Calthrop refused, but he lingered by the marquee until the band started Green Sleeves. Then he vanished into the crowd. Miss Marple thanked him and made her way to the vestry. Mrs. Dane Calthrop was polishing the brass lectern with more vigor than strictly necessary. Miss Marple, coffee with the enemy? She indicated the dig with a jerk of her cloth. Merely taking an interest. Miss Marple produced the chocolate wrapper. Found near the spoil heap. Your committee provides refreshments? Mrs. Dane Calthrop snorted. Only tea and disapproval, though Dr. Haydock's students are always picnicking. Chocolate biscuits, ginger beer, positively Roman in their indulgence. Miss Marple tucked the wrapper away. And the safe combination? Changed monthly. Only the committee knows it. Myself, the vicar, Colonel Proctor, Miss Price, and Dr. Haydock as curator. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Because, Miss Marple said mildly, someone moved the locket to the safe at noon, then swapped it before 2:30. Flour on your cuff, you said, yet yesterday it was clean. Mrs. Dane Calthrop's cloth stilled. I must have brushed it off, or imagined it. Miss Marple left her polishing and walked to the Red Lion for a glass of barley water. The saloon bar was quiet. Only old Mr. Finch nursed a half pint in the corner. The barmaid, Gladys, was reading Picture Post with the absorption of one who finds Hollywood more real than St. Mary mead. "Morning, Miss Marple. Lemon with your barley?" "Please, dear." Miss Marple settled on a stool. "Busy yesterday?" Gladys rolled her eyes. "Like Piccadilly Circus. Mr. Shaw bought a lemonade at 3 o'clock, said he needed to steady his nerves after the excitement. Paid with a 10-shilling note and told me to keep the change. Generous. Flash, more like. And the Colonel was in at 4, demanding whiskey though we'd run out. Said the locket business had given him a thirst." Miss Marple sipped her drink. The barley water was sharp and cold. "Anyone else?" Dr. Haydock popped in at 2:50. Muddy Boots asked for a packet of crisps. Said the children had stolen his lunch. Miss Marple's pencil moved in her notebook. Haydock, 2:45 and to 3:05 missing. Crisps at 2:50. Alibi? Shaw, lemonade at 3, Cedron, after swap. Chocolate wrapper, Pettigrew twins, or decoy. She finished her drink and walked home past the post office. Letitia Price was weighing a parcel for Mrs. Bantry, her face pale beneath her flour-dusted apron. "Any news?" she asked anxiously. "Only questions," Miss Marple replied. "Tell me, Letitia, did you share your marzipan lockets with anyone?" Letitia shook her head. "Only the practice ones. I gave one to Tommy Finch for helping carry trays, but the real joke was for the fate." Miss Marple thanked her and continued to her cottage. In the garden, her own roses were beginning to bud, pink, fragrant, innocent. She sat on the bench with her notebook and the brass button. The button was military issue, pre-war, with a crown and the letters SOE beneath. Colonel Proctor's medals had included no such button. His were all campaign ribbons. She turned it over. On the back, scratched with a knife point, CP 1943, Clara Proctor, the Colonel's sister. Miss Marple closed her eyes. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, but the picture was a mosaic, fragments of truth buried in clay and chocolate wrappers. She needed one more shard. The church clock struck noon. Luncheon could wait. She opened her basket, removed the Garibaldi biscuits, and set off for the dig once more. Dr. Haydock was photographing the dolphin mosaic. The undergraduates had broken for sandwiches. Miss Marple found the Pettigrew twins, identical, indistinguishable, and sticky with chocolate, sitting on a tarpaulin. "May I join you?" she asked. The twins giggled and made room. Miss Marple offered Garibaldi's. They accepted with delight. "Tell me," she said, "did you bring Fry's 5 boys to the dig yesterday?" The left-hand twin nodded. "A whole bar. We hid it in the spoil heap so Dr. Haydock wouldn't see." "And did you see anyone near the heap between 2:30 and 3? The right-hand twin squinted. "Only Mr. Shaw. He was poking about with his cane. Said he'd lost a glove. But we found it later in the vestry." Miss Marple's heart gave a small, triumphant skip. She thanked the twins and returned to Haydock. "One last question, Doctor. The glove Mr. Shaw lost, was it returned?" Haydock frowned. "Yes. Left. On the trestle table this morning. Gray Kid, monogrammed RS." Miss Marple smiled. "Thank you. You've been most helpful." She walked home through the churchyard. The dolphin mosaic gleamed in the sun. Somewhere beneath it, perhaps, lay a cipher wheel. But the real cipher was human nature, greed, grief, and the small, careless lies that betray us. In her notebook, she wrote, Shaw, glove planted, distraction. Button, Clara Proctor's, Colonel's keepsake. Chocolate, decoy for twins' presents. Haydock, alibi thin. Crisps at 2:50 but swap at 3:17. She closed the book. The church clock struck 1. The dig would resume. The thief would grow nervous. And Miss Marple, with her parasol and her peppermint lozenges, would be watching. Chapter 6. The vicar's wife's confession. The vestry smelled of lilies and candle wax. Rain had begun at dawn, a soft, persistent patter that turned the churchyard paths to mud and drove the archaeologists indoors. Mrs. Evelyn Dane Calthrop stood at the oak table, arranging the Sunday flowers with the precision of a quartermaster. Her artificial cherry hat hung on the coat stand like a retired general. Without it, she looked smaller, almost fragile. Miss Marple entered without knocking, closing the door against the draft. She carried no basket today, only her notebook and the brass button wrapped in tissue. "Evelyn, dear," she said gently, "we must talk." Mrs. Dane Calthrop's scissors snipped a lily stem with unnecessary force. "If it's about the locket, I've told Inspector Craddock everything twice." "Inspector Craddock is thorough," Miss Marple agreed. "But sometimes thoroughness misses the human heart." She placed the brass button on the table. "SOE issue, 1943, engraved CP Clara Proctor." Mrs. Dane Calthrop's hand stilled. "The Colonel's sister." "Indeed. Found in the spoil heap yesterday. Curious for a button lost 9 years ago." Miss Marple's voice was soft, relentless. "You said you moved the locket to the safe at noon. Returned at 2:30 to find the forgery. Yet your cuff was clean. No flour, though you judged cakes." Mrs. Dane Calthrop laid down the scissors. I brushed it off. Or never had it." Miss Marple opened her notebook. "The safe combination, committee only. You swapped Letitia's cake labels. Why?" A long silence. Rain drummed on the leaded windows. Finally, Mrs. Dane Calthrop sank onto the oak settle, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles blanched. "I wanted the locket safe," she whispered. "The insurance assessor insisted on photographs. I moved it at noon, unlocked the case, slipped it into the velvet pouch, locked the safe. The key never left my pocket." Her voice cracked. "At 2:30 I returned. The pouch was there, but lighter. Inside, the forgery, still warm." Miss Marple sat beside her. "Who knew the combination?" "Committee. And Mr. Shaw. He asked to sketch the locket Friday. I refused, but he saw me open the safe Saturday morning to check the pouch." Tears glittered. "I swapped the labels to protect Letitia. Her sponge was overambitious, might crack. I never dreamed." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Dreams are dangerous things, Evelyn. So are distractions." She produced the chocolate wrapper. "Found near the dig. The Pettigrew twins say Mr. Shaw searched the spoil heap at 2:45, lost glove. The glove appeared this morning, monogrammed RS. Mrs. Dane Calthrop stared. He planted it. Or retrieved it. A magician's misdirection." Miss Marple closed her notebook. "The swap happened between 2:30 and 3:17. You were judging. Letitia's oven was cold. Dr. Haydock was at the Red Lion at 2:50. Colonel Proctor marched past the museum at noon. Mr. Shaw lingered." Mrs. Dane Calthrop's shoulders shook. "I should have guarded it better." "You guarded what you thought was precious," Miss Marple said. "But the locket was never the prize. The secret was." She rose. "Dry your eyes, Evelyn. The rain will stop, and so will tears." She left the vestry. Rain had softened to mist. The church clock struck 3. In the dig, tarpaulins flapped like surrender flags. Miss Marple walked home past the post office. Closed, blinds drawn, and the Red Lion, where Colonel Proctor's voice boomed through the open window demanding whiskey. In her cottage, she opened the notebook. Safe opened twice, noon, real, 2:30, forge. Shaw, glove decoy, new combination. Flowerless cuff, lie, button Clara's. Proctor's grief or guilt, she added distraction, cake, swap, safe, thief, committee. The rain ceased. Sunlight glittered on wet leaves. Miss Marple reached for her knitting. The pattern tightened. Chapter 7. The second swap. Rain returned at dusk, lashing the village hall windows like thrown gravel. Inside, the Women's Institute had yielded to Inspector Craddock's tribunal. Trestle tables formed a square. Hurricane lamps hissed, throwing circles of gold onto rain-streaked glass. The suspects sat in a tense semicircle. Mrs. Dane Calthrop rigid in navy, Colonel Proctor bristling, Letitia Price clutching a damp handkerchief, Dr. Haydock polishing spectacles that refused to stay clean, Mr. Shaw urbane in camel hair. Miss Marple occupied the corner chair, knitting needles silent for once. Craddock stood beneath the Union Jack, notebook in hand. Laboratory results, London. The forgery was baked after noon. Residue of lemon zest and almond essence still active at 3:17. Matches the vicarage aga, used post-judging between 2:30 and 3 ob. Gasps rippled. Letitia Price fainted clean away. Mrs. Bantry fanned her with the fate program. Craddock continued. Aga timer shows 2:37-2:52. Mrs. Dane Calthrop was judging cakes, alibied by 30 witnesses. Someone else used the oven. Colonel Proctor surged to his feet. Absurd! The vicarage was locked. Servant's door, Craddock said. Key on a hook inside the scullery. Anyone familiar with the house? Mrs. Dane Calthrop's face drained. The committee. We all know the hook. Miss Marple's mild voice cut the tension. And the safe combination, changed monthly. Who suggested the new sequence last week? Dr. Haydock cleared his throat. I did. Random numbers from the Villa Grid reference. Craddock's eyes narrowed. Convenient. You left the dig at 2:45, bought crisps at the Red Lion at 2:50, 5 minutes unaccounted. Haydock flushed. I returned via the churchyard, mud on my boots. Miss Marple leaned forward. Mud, yes, and marzipan crumbs. She produced a paper twist. From your left boot heel, doctor, found in the church porch. Haydock stared as though the crumb were a scorpion. I must have stepped on a child's sweet. Or carried it from the aga. Miss Marple's needles remained still. The forgery was warm at 3:17, baked, glazed, inserted into Letitia's winning sponge after the first slice was cut. A second swap. Letitia revived, gasping. But I baked only one lemon drizzle for judging. Craddock nodded. Exactly. The cake on the table at 3 darn was identical, same doily, same drizzle pattern. But the marzipan locket inside was freshly baked. Someone substituted the entire sponge between 2:52 and 3:15. Mr. Shaw smiled thinly. Impossible. The tent was crowded. Crowded eyes see what they expect, Miss Marple said. A second identical cake, carried in a covered basket. Picnic hampers were everywhere. The swap took 30 seconds. Colonel Proctor slammed his swagger stick on the table. Then search the vicarage. The real locket must be there. Craddock shook his head. Already done. Safe empty. Forge still warm when we arrived at 4:02. Silence fell, broken only by rain. Miss Marple opened her notebook. Timeline, she said quietly. Mrs. D.C. moves real locket to safe. Returns, finds forge in pouch. Second forge baked in aga. Haydock missing. Shaw buys lemonade. Alibi, winning sponge cut. Marzipan revealed. She looked up. The thief needed 1 safe combination, 2 aga access, 3 identical sponge, 4 distraction. Letitia whimpered. I had no second drizzle. But you had practice marzipan, Miss Marple said. 3 lockets in your biscuit tin. Someone took one, baked it into a fresh sponge, substituted the cake. Dr. Haydock's spectacles slipped. The villa students, they picnic constantly. I saw a covered basket left in the vestry. Craddock pounced. Search it. The basket, wicker faded green, was produced from the vestry cupboard. Inside, a crumpled linen cloth, flower traces, and a single rose gold crumb. Haydock stared as though it were dynamite. Miss Marple rose. The real locket was never in the safe after noon. The first forge distracted us while the second, warm, perfect, hid the theft. The thief counted on our eyes staying on the cake. She turned to Haydock. Your boots, doctor, the left heel, may we see? Haydock hesitated, then lifted his foot. Embedded in the tread, a perfect marzipan clasp, gold paint flaking. Craddock snapped handcuffs. Julian Haydock, I arrest you. Haydock sagged. I only wanted the cipher wheel for history. Miss Marple's voice was gentle. History belongs to everyone, doctor, not to ambition. Outside, rain softened to drizzle. The church clock struck 8. One thread had snapped, but the tapestry was far from complete. Chapter 8. The Cipher in the Cake Midnight. The cottage was silent except for the tick of the mantel clock and the soft hiss of the dying fire. Miss Marple sat at her gate-leg table, a single lamp pooling gold over scattered clues. The brass button, the etched pebble, the marzipan clasp, the chocolate wrapper, and, center stage, the museum's cheap brass forgery still smelling faintly of almond. Her knitting lay abandoned. Lavender wool could wait. She turned the forgery over. The clasp was crude solder, but the symbols, tiny, incised, were identical to the real lockets. Dr. Haydock had sworn they were coordinates. Yet coordinates to what? Miss Marple opened Arabella Clement's bequest file, borrowed from the vicarage safe. Inside the Admiralty letter, a photograph of Arabella in waif uniform, and, tucked in the back, a yellowed recipe card. Gooseberry jam, 1943, for victory. The handwriting was Arabella's elegant looping, but between the lines of sugar and fruit, faint pencil marks formed the same symbols as the locket. Miss Marple's eyes widened. Not coordinates, a recipe cipher. She fetched her magnifying glass. The symbols overlaid the ingredients. Heart shape, 1 lb gooseberries arrow wave, 1 lb sugar clasp twist, boil 10 minutes. But the final line, fold in secrets with the flour, stir gently. Flour? Jam had no flour. She opened her notebook. Letitia Price had won Best Jam every year since 1946 with Arabella's recipe. The prize jar, sealed, ribboned, sat on the museum shelf beside the locket case. Untouched. Unopened. Miss Marple rose, donned her mackintosh, and took her umbrella. The rain had stopped. The church clock struck 12 as she slipped out into the lane. The museum, a converted stable behind the vicarage, was locked. But Miss Marple had borrowed Mrs. Dane Calthrop's spare key for the hymnals. Moonlight silvered the glass case. The brass forgery gleamed mockingly. On the shelf above, the jam jar glowed like a ruby. She unlocked the case, lifted the jar. Heavy. Too heavy for gooseberries. The wax seal was intact, but the ribbon, blue faded, had been retied. A knot slipped too easily. Inside the jar, suspended in amber syrup, was the Clement locket. Rose gold, heart-shaped, clasp gleaming. The sugar had preserved it perfectly. Miss Marple's breath caught. The cipher wheel was never buried. It was hidden in plain sight, inside the jam. Arabella entered annually knowing Letitia would win, knowing the jar would stay sealed for display. But Haydock had discovered the recipe card. He swapped the locket into the jam during the 2:30 safe visit, baked the forgery in the aga, substituted the cake. The marzipan distraction was Letitia's, unwitting. The brass forgery was his decoy. She wrapped the jar in her scarf and returned home. At the table, she pried open the locket. Inside, a tiny roll of onion skin. Unfurled, it read, "Wheel beneath the dolphin, stir gently." The Roman villa, Haydock's dig. Miss Marple lit the fire again. Dawn was hours away, but the pattern was complete. She wrote, "Jam jar, her hiding place. Haydock, new recipe, access to Aga, Villa Letitia. Innocent distraction, Shaw, red herring, Colonel. Grief, not guilt." She added the onion skin note, closed the book, and allowed herself 1 peppermint lozenge. The church clock struck 1. Tomorrow tea and truth. Chapter 9. Tea and treachery. 11 o'clock. The vicarage drawing room smelled of Darjeeling and damp wool. Rain had cleared, sunlight slanted through lace curtains, striping the chintz like tiger stripes. The suspect sat in a nervous crescent, Mrs. Dane Calthrop pouring with trembling hand, Colonel Proctor rigid in blazer, Letitia Price clutching a damp handkerchief, Mr. Shaw polishing his cane, Dr. Haydock flanked by 2 constables. Inspector Craddock stood by the mantel. Miss Marple presided over the tea tray, lavender cardigan buttoned to the throat. She lifted the gooseberry jam jar, now rinsed, the locket gleaming on a velvet cushion beside it. "The locket was never stolen," she began, voice gentle as milk. "It was returned to its rightful place." A collective inhale. Letitia whimpered. Miss Marple continued. "Arabella Clement's bequest was twofold, the locket and her prize jam recipe. Every year since 1946, Letitia entered it and won. The jar remained sealed, displayed beside the locket, a perfect hiding place." She opened the locket. The onion skin note fluttered out. "The cipher wheel is beneath the dolphin mosaic. But the locket itself was the key." Dr. Haydock lunged. "I only wanted credit," Miss Marple finished. "You discovered the recipe card, realized the jam concealed the locket. On Friday, you etched the pebble, substituted it in Letitia's practice marzipan, insurance if she opened the tin. Saturday noon, Mrs. Dane Calthrop moved the locket to the safe. You followed at 2:30, swapped it into the jam jar you'd prepared, sealed it with wax from the vestry candle. The jar went back to the shelf. No one noticed the ribbon retied." Letitia gasped. "My biscuit tin." "Entered Thursday night," Miss Marple said. "You left the post office door unlatched for the mail sack. Dr. Haydock took one marzipan locket, baked a fresh sponge in the Aga, 237 to 252, glazed it, inserted the forgery, substituted the entire cake during the 3 almonds commotion. The first slice revealed his marzipan, warm, perfect. The brass forgery in the case was planted earlier, still tacky." Colonel Proctor growled. "And the button?" "Clara's keepsake," Miss Marple said softly. "Dropped in the spoil heap when Dr. Haydock retrieved his trowel. Used to scrape wax from the jar lid. The chocolate wrapper distracted the twins. The glove distracted Mr. Shaw." Shaw smiled thinly. "I was merely curious." "Curiosity is innocent," Miss Marple replied. "Ambition is not." She turned to Haydock. "You plan to discover the locket in the jam next week, claim the cipher wheel for academia, but Letitia's genuine marzipan, baked weeks earlier, confused the timeline. When the brass forgery appeared, she stayed silent, hoping to expose you." Haydock sagged. "History belongs to the village," Miss Marple said. "As Arabella intended." Craddock snapped handcuffs. "Julian Haydock, you are charged." The constables led him out. Sunlight caught the locket. It flashed like a promise. Mrs. Dane Calthrop refilled cups with steadying hands. "And the wheel." "Already excavated," Craddock said. "Anonymous donation to Bletchley. Returned at dawn." Letitia sniffled. "I only wanted to make people smile." Miss Marple patted her knee. "You did, dear. Just not in the way you expected." The church clock struck the quarter. Tea cooled. The mystery was mended. Chapter 10. Gooseberry Jam and Forgiveness. A week later, the vicarage garden had recovered its dignity. The marquees were gone, the brass band returned to Much Benham, and the lawn bore only faint scars where the archaeologists had filled their trenches. The dolphin mosaic, now carefully lifted, had been crated for Bletchley Park Museum, labeled "Gift of an Anonymous Donor." The Clement locket rested once more in its glass case, rose gold catching the morning sun like a quiet heartbeat. A new placard in Mrs. Dane Calthrop's copper plate read, "Return to St. Mary Mead where it belongs." The Fate Committee gathered for a reconciliation tea on the terrace. A white cloth fluttered, scones steamed, gooseberry jam glowed in a cut glass dish. Mrs. Dane Calthrop presided in a dove-gray frock, the artificial cherry retired to a drawer. Colonel Proctor had exchanged bluster for a tentative smile. Letitia Price, cheeks pink with pride, passed plates of her prize lemon drizzle. No marzipan surprises this time. Miss Marple sat beneath the cedar knitting the final rows of the lavender cardigan. Inspector Craddock, off-duty in tweed, accepted a second scone with guilty pleasure. "Haydock's confessed everything," he said, brushing crumbs from his tie. "Wrote a full statement from his cell, 20 pages on Roman drainage, 5 on the locket. Claims it was for science." "Science," Mrs. Dane Calthrop snorted, "is no excuse for sleight of hand." Letitia set down the teapot. "I still feel dreadful. My silly joke caused all this." "Nonsense," Miss Marple said mildly. "Your joke exposed the thief. Dr. Haydock needed a distraction. You provided one without knowing. The real crime was his greed." Colonel Proctor cleared his throat. "Spoke to the lad yesterday. Through the bars, you understand, told him Clara would have been ashamed. He cried like a baby." He buttered a scone with unnecessary violence. "Still, young men make mistakes." A letter lay beside Miss Marple's plate, Haydock's handwriting, forwarded by Craddock. She opened it. "Dear Miss Marple, you were right. History is not mine to hoard. I have donated my villa rubbings to the county museum. Please tell Letitia her jam is the best I ever tasted, even preserved in evidence. Yours in contrition, J. Haydock." Letitia blushed crimson. "He tasted my jam?" "From the evidence jar," Craddock grinned. "Constable Finch helped." Laughter rippled, soft, healing. The church clock struck 11. A blackbird sang in the laburnum. Mrs. Dane Calthrop raised her cup. "To St. Mary Mead, may our secrets stay sweet." "And our scones lighter than suspicion," added Colonel Proctor. Miss Marple lifted her tea. "To human nature like gooseberry jam, tart but with sugar quite palatable." She finished the cardigan's cuff, snipped the wool, and held up the tiny garment. "For the district nurse's grandchild, a new beginning." The sun climbed higher. Children's voices drifted from the recreation ground. The scent of roses mingled with warm scones. The locket gleamed in its case, the cipher wheel safe in its museum, and St. Mary Mead settled back into its gentle rhythm. Knitting, gossip, and the quiet certainty that Miss Marple was watching.